The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete walkway as Elena Vasquez approached the entrance to Camp Pendleton's shooting range facility. Her weathered canvas bag hung heavy on her shoulder, containing a rifle that had seen more battles than most of the Marines currently stationed here would ever witness. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting, even like greeting an old friend after years apart. Elena paused at the security checkpoint, her civilian clothes drawing curious glances from the young Marines processing through the gate. At 52, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her unremarkable appearance. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her faded jeans and plain cotton shirt gave no indication of the extraordinary skill she possessed. The guard examined her visitor credentials with practiced efficiency. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, according to his name tape, seemed friendly enough as he processed her paperwork. "Your first time using our facilities, ma'am," he said, glancing up from his computer screen. Elena nodded, offering a brief smile. "I have permission from range control to use the long-distance targets today." Rodriguez stamped her pass and handed it back. "Range Master Torres will get you set up. He's expecting you. The facility operates under strict safety protocols, so please follow all instructions." "Thank you, Sergeant." Elena secured the pass to her shirt pocket and continued toward the range complex. The shooting facility sprawled across several acres of carefully maintained grounds. Multiple firing lines stretched out toward targets positioned at various distances, from close-quarters combat ranges to precision shooting areas extending beyond 800 yards. The distant crack of rifle fire echoed across the landscape as Marines conducted their qualification exercises. Elena found Range Master Torres near the equipment check-in area, clipboard in hand, as he supervised the morning activities. Sergeant Torres was a compact man with calloused hands and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades around firearms. His eyes held the sharp awareness common to experienced range safety officers. "You must be Ms. Vasquez," Torres said, approaching her with an extended hand. "I got the call from headquarters about your range time request. They said you needed access to our precision shooting lanes." "That's correct," Elena replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip. "I appreciate you accommodating my schedule. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of courage where you're from." Torres gestured toward the distant targets. "We got the 800-yard line available for the next 2 hours. What kind of equipment are you working with today?" Elena shifted the canvas bag on her shoulder. "It's a specialized rifle. I'll need to zero it on your range before I begin any serious shooting." Torres nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Safety briefing first, then we'll get you positioned." He paused, studying her face with professional curiosity. "You have prior military experience, ma'am?" "Some," Elena answered simply, her tone suggesting the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Torres led Elena across the range complex toward the precision shooting lanes, his boots crunching against the gravel pathway. The morning air carried the distinctive smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of spent brass casings scattered across the firing positions. Elena breathed it in deeply, finding comfort in the familiar atmosphere that reminded her of countless hours spent behind a rifle scope. The 800-yard firing line consisted of reinforced concrete shooting benches positioned at regular intervals, each equipped with adjustable rests and wind flags to help shooters gauge environmental conditions. Elena selected a position near the center of the line, placing her canvas bag on the bench with deliberate care. "Let me see what you're working with," Torres said, his curiosity evident as Elena began unzipping the weathered bag. She withdrew the rifle slowly, revealing a weapon that immediately commanded attention. The stock showed years of careful use, its wood bearing the honest wear marks of a tool that had served its purpose countless times. The barrel was longer than standard military issue, custom machined with a matte finish that would eliminate unwanted glare. The scope mounted above was clearly high-end equipment, though its exterior showed the same weathered patina as the rifle itself. Torres whistled low under his breath. That's some serious hardware. Custom work. Elena nodded as she began her inspection routine, checking the action with practice movements. It's been modified for long-distance precision work. Before Torres could respond, the sharp bark of an authoritative voice cut across the range. What the hell is a civilian doing on my firing line? Both Elena and Torres turned to see Colonel Bradley Hutchins striding toward them, his chest puffed out with the kind of aggressive posture that came naturally to men accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Hutchins was a large man in his early 50s, his uniform pressed to perfection and his silver hair trimmed with military precision. His pale blue eyes held a cold intensity as they fixed on Elena. Colonel Hutchins, Torres began, standing straighter. This is Ms. Vasquez. She has authorization from range control for precision shooting practice. I don't care what paperwork she's waving around. Hutchins snapped, his gaze moving dismissively over Elena's civilian attire. This is a military installation, not a country club. We don't have time to babysit weekend warriors playing dress-up with Daddy's hunting rifle. Elena remained silent, continuing her equipment inspection with calm efficiency. She had encountered this type of officer before, men whose authority derived more from their rank than their competence. Experience had taught her that engaging with such personalities only escalated unnecessary conflicts. Hutchins stepped closer, his voice growing louder. I'm talking to you, lady. Where exactly did you get that rifle? It looks like military equipment, and I want to know how a civilian got her hands on government property. Torres cleared his throat nervously. Colonel, the rifle appears to be civilian legal. Ms. Vasquez has proper documentation. Don't tell me what's legal, Sergeant, Hutchins barked. I've been in this man's army for 26 years, and I know military hardware when I see it. That scope alone is worth more than most people make in a month. Elena finally looked up from her rifle, meeting Hutchins' hostile stare with steady composure. The rifle is legally owned, Colonel. I have all required permits and documentation. Hutchins laughed harshly. Permits? Documentation. You think a piece of paper makes you qualified to shoot alongside Marines who've earned the right to be here through blood and sweat. The colonel's voice carried across the range, drawing attention from other Marines conducting their training exercises. Several young riflemen had paused their activities to watch the confrontation, sensing the tension building between the imposing officer and the quiet civilian woman. The atmosphere on the range shifted as word of the challenge spread among the Marines conducting their morning training. Hutchins had effectively turned Elena's simple range session into a public spectacle, and now nearly 24 servicemen had gathered at a respectful distance to witness the outcome. Their conversations carried a mixture of skepticism and curiosity about the civilian woman who had dared to accept such a demanding test. Elena settled into her shooting position with deliberate care, adjusting the bipod legs beneath her rifle until the weapon sat perfectly level. She checked her scope settings, making minute adjustments to the elevation and windage knobs with the precision of someone who understood that at 800 yards, even the smallest error would be magnified dramatically. Torres positioned himself beside the spotting scope, his role as range safety officer requiring him to observe and call out the results of each shot. The 800-yard target stood like a distant postage stamp against the earthen berm, its 10-inch black bulls, barely visible to the naked eye even with perfect vision. Hutchins crossed his arms and addressed the gathered Marines with theatrical authority. Gentlemen, you're about to witness what happens when civilians overestimate their abilities. Pay attention, because this is why we don't allow unqualified personnel on military ranges. Private Kowalski leaned toward his squad mate Chun. Think she'll even hit the target frame? He whispered. Chun shrugged, but his eyes remained focused on Elena's methodical preparation. Something about her movements suggested more experience than her appearance indicated. She handled the rifle with an intimacy that spoke of countless hours behind similar weapons. Elena removed a small notebook from her shirt pocket, consulting what appeared to be carefully recorded data about atmospheric conditions, wind patterns, and ballistic calculations. Her pen moved quickly across the page as she made fresh notations based on the current environmental factors. The morning breeze carried a slight crosswind from the southeast, requiring compensation in her scope adjustment. "What's all the scribbling about?" Hutchins called out mockingly. "Are you calculating how badly you're going to miss?" Elena ignored the comment, instead focusing on the wind flags positioned at regular intervals between her shooting position and the distant target. The fabric indicators showed a consistent pattern that would require approximately 2 minutes of angle adjustment to compensate for the prevailing conditions. She chambered her first round with a smooth, practice motion, the bolt closing with a solid click of precision engineering. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm as she settled into the shooting position that felt as natural as walking. The rifle stock nestled against her shoulder with perfect familiarity, and her cheek found its customary spot against the comb. Through her scope, the distant target appeared larger, but still demanding. The 10-inch bullseye filled only a small portion of her field of view, requiring absolute precision to achieve the accuracy that Hutchins clearly expected her to fail to demonstrate. Elena's finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without disturbing her sight picture. "Range is hot," Torres announced, following standard safety protocols. All personnel behind the firing line. The gathered Marines stepped back automatically, their training overriding their curiosity about the outcome of this unusual challenge. Even Hutchins moved to a safer position, though his expression remained confident that Elena would soon provide him with the satisfaction of being proven correct about civilian incompetence. Elena's world narrowed to the essential elements of precision shooting. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing steadied, and her entire focus concentrated on the relationship between her rifle's crosshairs and the distant black circle that represented success or failure. The weight of the gathered audience faded into background awareness as she entered the mental state that had once made her legendary among a very select group of military professionals. Wind conditions remained steady. Atmospheric pressure was optimal. Her equipment was perfectly zeroed and ready. Elena's finger began its final pressure on the trigger, applying force straight back with the kind of control that separated expert marksmen from ordinary shooters. The first shot would tell the story. Either she would begin proving herself worthy of the respect these Marines gave only to proven warriors, or she would face the humiliation that Hutchins clearly anticipated. Elena's breathing stopped at the natural respiratory pause, her sight picture perfect, her trigger finger applying the final ounces of pressure that would send her first bullet across 800 yards of California morning air. The rifle's report cracked across the range like thunder, its sound reverberating off the concrete barriers and rolling across the California hills beyond. Elena absorbed the recoil smoothly, her body moving with the weapon rather than fighting against it. Years of training had taught her to maintain her sight picture through the shot, watching for any indication of where her bullet had struck. Torres peered through the spotting scope, adjusting the focus to bring the distant target into sharp clarity. The silence stretched for several seconds as he searched the target face for signs of impact. Elena remained motionless behind her rifle, waiting for the call that would determine whether her first shot had found its mark. "Hit," Torres announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Dead center of the bullseye. A murmur ran through the gathered Marines. Private Kowalski blinked in disbelief, while Chin nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had suspected. Hutchins' confident expression faltered slightly, though he quickly recovered his composure. "Lucky shot," the colonel declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see if she can do it again." Elena chambered her second round without acknowledging the comment. Her focus remained absolute, her breathing returning to the controlled rhythm that preceded each shot. She made a minor adjustment to her scope, compensating for a slight shift in wind direction indicated by the range flags. The second shot followed within 30 seconds of the first. Again, the rifle's bark echoed across the range, and again Elena maintained perfect follow-through. Torres studied the target through his spotting scope, taking longer this time to locate the impact point. "Hit," he called out, Also in the bullseye, approximately 2 inches from the first shot. The Marines exchanged meaningful glances. 2 consecutive bullseyes at 800 yards was no accident, regardless of what Hutchins might claim. Elena's shooting demonstrated a level of precision that most of them had only witnessed during advanced marksmanship competitions. Hutchins stepped closer to Torres' spotting scope. "Let me see that target." Torres moved aside to allow the colonel a clear view. Through the high-powered optic, Hutchins could clearly see 2 distinct bullet holes within the black 10-inch circle, both placed with the kind of accuracy that required exceptional skill and experience. "She's got 3 more shots," Hutchins said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Don't start celebrating yet." Elena cycled the bolt for her 3rd round, her movements maintaining the same mechanical precision that had characterized her first 2 shots. Her breathing pattern never varied, her position remained rock-steady, and her trigger control continued to demonstrate the kind of consistency that separated professional marksmen from talented amateurs. The 3rd shot produced another sharp crack, followed by the familiar silence as Torres searched for the impact point. This time his search was briefer, the bullet hole clearly visible within the scoring rings. "Another hit," Torres announced, still in the bullseye, forming a tight group with the previous shots. Several Marines began whispering among themselves, their skepticism giving way to genuine interest in Elena's performance. Sergeant Morrison, a seasoned infantry veteran with multiple combat deployments, moved closer to observe Elena's technique. "Her fundamentals are textbook perfect," Morrison commented to his fellow NCO. "Breathing, position, trigger control, everything's exactly like they teach at sniper school." Elena prepared for her 4th shot, chambering the round with the same deliberate care she had shown throughout the challenge. The wind conditions remained stable, her equipment continued to perform flawlessly, and her mental state stayed locked in the focused calm that had served her well throughout her career. The 4th shot echoed across the range, and Torres immediately moved to his spotting scope. The target now showed 4 distinct impacts, all contained within the demanding confines of the 10-inch scoring area that Hutchins had specified as the minimum standard for success. For 4, Torres called out. "All shots in the bullseye." Hutchins' face had grown noticeably redder as Elena's performance continued to exceed his expectations. The colonel had clearly anticipated a quick and decisive demonstration of civilian incompetence, but instead found himself witnessing a display of marksmanship that rivaled anything he had seen from his own Marines. "1 shot left," he announced grimly. "Let's see if she can finish what she started." Elena chambered her final round, her 5th and deciding shot in the challenge that would determine her right to use the military range. The gathered Marines watched in expectant silence, many of them now hoping to see her complete what had become an impressive demonstration of precision shooting. Her final preparation took slightly longer than the previous shots, as Elena made minute adjustments to account for the gradually changing atmospheric conditions. The morning sun had climbed higher, creating subtle thermal currents that could affect bullet trajectory over the long distance to the target. Elena's finger found the trigger for the 5th time, her sight picture perfect as she prepared to complete Colonel Hutchins' challenge. The 5th shot rang out with the same authority as the previous 4, its sound cutting through the morning air with mechanical precision. Elena held her position behind the rifle, maintaining her sight picture as the bullet traveled the 800 yards to its target. The gathered Marines stood in absolute silence, waiting for Torres to deliver the verdict that would complete this unexpected demonstration. Torres adjusted his spotting scope with careful deliberation, scanning the target face for the final impact. The tension on the range had become palpable, with even the skeptical Marines now invested in seeing Elena complete her perfect performance. "Hit," Torres announced, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. 5 for 5, all in the bullseye. "That's one hell of a group, ma'am." The Marines erupted in surprised murmurs and appreciative comments. Private Chun turned to Kowalski with an expression of amazement. 5 shots, 800 yards, all bullseyes. I've never seen shooting like that outside of competition. Sergeant Morrison approached Elena's position with obvious respect. "Ma'am, That was outstanding marksmanship. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Elena began safing her rifle, ejecting the spent brass, and opening the bolt to ensure the chamber was clear. Thank you, Sergeant. I've had some training over the years. Hutchins stormed over to the spotting scope, shouldering Torres aside to examine the target himself. Through the high-powered optic, he could clearly see 5 bullet holes clustered within a space smaller than a dinner plate. The shooting had been so precise that the impacts formed what appeared to be a deliberate pattern within the bullseye. This doesn't prove anything, Hutchins declared, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Any decent shooter can get lucky with 5 shots. Let's see how you perform under real pressure. Elena looked up from her equipment maintenance, meeting the colonel's frustrated gaze with calm composure. I believe our agreement was 5 shots at 800 yards, all on target. I fulfilled those requirements. Torres nodded in confirmation. The lady completed the challenge exactly as specified, Colonel. 5 hits in the 10 ring at 800 yards. Several Marines had moved closer to examine Elena's rifle, their professional curiosity overcoming their initial skepticism. The weapon's custom modifications were clearly visible now, from the precision machine barrel to the high-end optic system that had enabled such remarkable accuracy. Private Rodriguez, a designated marksman from 2nd Battalion, studied the rifle with obvious appreciation. That's some serious hardware, ma'am. Custom barrel, match-grade trigger, precision stock. This isn't recreational equipment. Elena nodded as she began packing her equipment. It's been modified for specific applications. What kind of applications? Hutchins demanded, his suspicion evident. Where exactly did a civilian acquire military-grade precision equipment like this? The question hung in the air as Elena continued her methodical post-shooting routine. She cleaned her rifle with practiced efficiency, checking each component with the kind of attention to detail that suggested this ritual had been performed countless times under various conditions. Sergeant Morrison stepped forward, his experienced eye taking in Elena's professional demeanor. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background? Your shooting technique and equipment handling suggest military training. Elena paused in her cleaning routine, considering how much to reveal about herself. The gathered Marines waited expectantly, sensing that there was far more to this quiet, civilian woman than her appearance suggested. I served for a time, Elena said simply. Different era, different circumstances. What branch? Hutchins pressed aggressively. What unit? I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with here. Elena resumed cleaning her rifle, her movements steady and unhurried despite the colonel's hostile tone. That was a long time ago, Colonel. I'm just here to maintain my skills and ensure my equipment remains properly zeroed. Torres studied Elena with growing interest. Ma'am, that shooting pattern you just demonstrated isn't something you learn in basic marksmanship training. That level of precision requires specialized instruction. The morning sun continued its climb, casting shorter shadows across the range as the confrontation took on new dimensions. Elena's perfect performance had shifted the dynamic from simple civilian versus military authority to something more complex and intriguing. Hutchins circled back to Elena's position, his frustration evident as he struggled to reassert his authority over a situation that had developed far beyond his initial expectations. You may have passed this little test, but I still don't like civilians using my range. Military facilities are for military personnel. Elena finished reassembling her rifle and secured it in its case. Colonel, I have proper authorization and documentation. My range time was approved through appropriate channels, and I've demonstrated that I can use the facilities safely and effectively. The gathered Marines watched this exchange with growing fascination, sensing that there were undercurrents to this conflict that went beyond simple range usage policies. Elena's calm professionalism in the face of Hutchins' hostility suggested experience with difficult authority figures and high-pressure situations. Hutchins paced behind Elena's shooting position like a caged predator, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained frustration. The perfect shooting demonstration had undermined his authority in front of his Marines, and his aggressive posture suggested he was not prepared to accept defeat gracefully. "I want to examine that rifle," Hutchins announced with commanding authority. "Military equipment on a military base falls under my jurisdiction for inspection." Elena paused in securing her equipment case, her hands resting lightly on the latches. "Colonel, this is legally owned civilian property. I have all required documentation and permits." "I don't care about your paperwork," Hutchins snapped. "That weapon has military characteristics, and I have the authority to inspect any equipment brought onto this installation." Torres shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between competing directives. "Colonel, Range Control approved her equipment through the standard screening process. Everything checked out legally." Sergeant Morrison studied the rifle case with professional interest. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, what's the history of that particular weapon? It has some unique characteristics that suggest custom military applications." Elena considered the question carefully, aware that her answer would determine the direction of this increasingly tense confrontation. "The rifle belonged to my father. He served in Vietnam as a Marine sniper." Several Marines exchanged meaningful glances. Vietnam-era sniper equipment was legendary among military marksmen, representing a time when individual craftsmen created precision weapons for the most demanding combat applications. "Your father was a Marine sniper," Morrison repeated with obvious respect. "That explains the custom work. Those guys built their own rifles back then, creating weapons that were years ahead of standard military issue." Hutchins moved closer, his suspicion undimmed by this revelation. "If your father was military, then that rifle might still be government property. Many sniper weapons were never properly transferred to civilian ownership after the war." Elena's expression hardened slightly, the first sign of emotion she had displayed during the entire confrontation. "Colonel, my father earned that rifle through distinguished service to his country. He modified it himself, paid for the improvements with his own money, and legally transferred it to me before his death." Private Chin whispered to his squad mate, "My grandfather served in Vietnam. Said the snipers were legends, taking impossible shots under conditions that would break most people." Kowalski nodded agreement. Vietnam snipers were a different breed, operating alone in enemy territory, making shots that changed the course of battles. Hutchins remained unconvinced by Elena's explanation. "I still want to inspect that weapon. Something doesn't add up about your story, and I intend to get to the bottom of it." Torres attempted to defuse the situation. "Colonel, perhaps we could contact Range Control to verify the documentation they approved this morning." Elena stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Colonel, you've challenged my right to be here, questioned my equipment, and demanded proof of my abilities. I've satisfied every requirement you've established. What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" The gathered Marines watched this confrontation with growing interest, recognizing that something significant was occurring beyond a simple dispute over range privileges. Elena's calm professionalism contrasted sharply with Hutchins' increasingly aggressive behavior. "What I'm trying to accomplish," Hutchins said with cold authority, "is maintaining proper security and discipline on my range. Civilians don't belong here, especially civilians carrying suspicious equipment and making claims about military service they can't substantiate." Elena's eyes flashed with controlled anger, though her voice remained steady. "What claims have I made that require substantiation, Colonel? I said my father served as a Marine sniper in Vietnam. That's a matter of record, not a claim." Morrison stepped forward, sensing the confrontation was escalating beyond reasonable bounds. "Colonel, the lady has demonstrated exceptional marksmanship and proper range safety. Her equipment is obviously high quality and well-maintained." Hutchins wheeled on Morrison with barely contained fury. "Sergeant, I didn't ask for your opinion about this situation. I'm trying to determine whether we have a security risk on our hands." Elena began moving toward the range exit, her equipment secured and her patience with Hutchins' harassment clearly exhausted. "Gentlemen, thank you for your courtesy. I'll be leaving now. You're not going anywhere until I'm satisfied about that rifle," Hutchins declared, stepping to block her path. "I want serial numbers, registration documents, and proof of legal transfer from military to civilian ownership. The Marines watched this confrontation with growing unease, recognizing that their colonel was overstepping reasonable authority in his treatment of a civilian who had committed no violation of regulations or safety protocols. Torres cleared his throat nervously. "Colonel, perhaps we should contact the provost marshal if there are questions about legal documentation. That's really outside our jurisdiction as range personnel." Elena faced Hutchins directly, her composure intact despite his increasingly hostile behavior. "Colonel, you're preventing a civilian with proper authorization from leaving a military installation. I suggest you reconsider your position." The tension on the range reached a breaking point as Hutchins maintained his position, blocking Elena's exit path. His face had grown increasingly red with frustration, and his aggressive posture suggested a man who was not accustomed to having his authority questioned by anyone, especially a civilian woman. "Colonel," Elena said with measured calm, "you have no legal authority to detain me or confiscate my property. I've complied with all regulations and demonstrated that I pose no safety risk to your facility." Hutchins stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "Lady, you're on a military installation under my command. I have broad authority to ensure security and good order, and that includes investigating suspicious individuals and equipment." The gathered Marines shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that their commanding officer was escalating a situation that should have ended with Elena's successful completion of his challenge. Sergeant Morrison exchanged concerned glances with Torres, both men sensing that Hutchins was overreaching his legitimate authority. Private Rodriguez whispered to his squad mate, "This doesn't feel right. She's done everything he asked and more." Chin nodded agreement. 5 perfect shots at 800 yards. That's better shooting than most of us could manage on our best day. Elena remained motionless, her equipment case held securely in her grip. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Hutchins' agitated behavior, suggesting experience with hostile confrontations and difficult personalities. "Colonel Hutchins," Torres ventured carefully, "perhaps we should contact base security if there are legitimate concerns about documentation. They have the proper authority to investigate civilian credentials." "I don't need base security to handle one civilian," Hutchins snapped. "I'm perfectly capable of managing this situation myself." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, the first visible sign that her patience was approaching its limits. "Colonel, your behavior is becoming inappropriate. I've satisfied every requirement you've established, answered your questions truthfully, and demonstrated that I'm qualified to use this facility." The morning sun continued climbing, casting harsh shadows across the range as the confrontation stretched beyond reasonable bounds. Several Marines had begun checking their watches, aware that this standoff was consuming valuable training time and creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Morrison stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Colonel, with respect, the lady has proper authorization and has demonstrated exceptional shooting skills. Perhaps we should allow her to complete her range session as scheduled." Hutchins turned on Morrison with barely controlled rage. "Sergeant, are you questioning my judgment about security matters on my own range?" Morrison straightened to attention, his years of military training overriding his personal opinions about the situation. "No, sir, Colonel. I'm simply suggesting that we follow established protocols for handling civilian range users." Elena watched this exchange with growing concern, recognizing that Hutchins' erratic behavior was putting the Marines in an impossible position between following orders and maintaining professional standards. "Gentlemen," Elena said quietly, "I appreciate your courtesy and professionalism. However, I won't be responsible for creating conflicts between military personnel. If the colonel believes my presence here is inappropriate, I'll leave voluntarily." Hutchins' expression showed momentary satisfaction at this apparent victory, but his triumph was short-lived as Elena continued speaking. "However," Elena added with steel in her voice, "I'll be filing a formal complaint with base command about this harassment. Military personnel don't have unlimited authority to intimidate civilians who are legally using authorized facilities." The Marines watched this development with obvious interest, recognizing that Elena was not simply accepting Hutchins' bullying behavior, but preparing to take official action against his inappropriate conduct. "You can file all the complaints you want," Hutchins declared with false bravado. "I'm protecting military security, and my superiors will support my actions." Elena smiled slightly, the expression carrying implications that made several Marines take notice. "Colonel, I suspect your superiors will be very interested in reviewing your handling of the situation, especially when they learn about your treatment of someone with my background." "What background?" Hutchins demanded, his suspicion flaring again. "You've been evasive about your supposed military service since you arrived here." Torres stepped forward, sensing that Elena was preparing to reveal information that would change the entire dynamic of this confrontation. "Ma'am, perhaps it would help if you clarified your service record for the colonel." Elena set down her equipment case with deliberate care, her movements suggesting that she was preparing for a revelation that would resolve this conflict once and for all. The gathered Marines sensed that something significant was about to occur, their attention focused completely on the quiet civilian woman who had already surprised them with her exceptional marksmanship skills. Elena's subtle smile carried implications that sent a ripple of anticipation through the gathered Marines. The atmosphere on the range had shifted from hostile confrontation to expectant tension, as if everyone present sensed that a significant revelation was imminent. "Colonel," Elena said with quiet authority, "you've made several assumptions about my qualifications and background. Perhaps it's time I corrected those misconceptions." Hutchins crossed his arms defensively, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I'm listening. But I warn you, any attempt to fabricate military credentials will only make your situation worse." Elena reached into her jacket pocket with deliberate slowness, withdrawing a worn leather wallet that showed years of careful use. The Marines leaned forward slightly, their curiosity overcoming their military bearing as they waited to see what documentation she would produce. Torres positioned himself for a clear view, his role as range safety officer requiring him to witness whatever Elena was preparing to reveal. The morning air carried the distant sound of training exercises from other parts of the base, a reminder that normal military operations continued despite this unusual confrontation. Elena opened the wallet and extracted a plastic identification card, its surface bearing the distinctive format and security features of official military documentation. She held it at an angle that caught the sunlight, making the embedded holographic elements clearly visible. Sergeant Morrison stepped closer, his trained eye immediately recognizing the card's authenticity. The format was familiar to any career military professional, though something about its specific markings suggested capabilities beyond standard military identification. "That's a CAC card," Morrison observed, referring to the common access card used throughout the military. "But the color coding and security markings are different from standard issue." Elena handed the card to Torres, who examined it with professional thoroughness. His expression changed gradually as he processed the information displayed on the identification, his eyes widening with surprise and recognition. "Ma'am," Torres said quietly, "this shows you're still active duty. Current status, specialized assignment." The Marines exchanged startled glances. Elena's civilian appearance and casual demeanor had given no indication that she remained an active member of the military, let alone someone assigned to specialized duties that required unique identification. Hutchins snatched the card from Torres, studying it with intense scrutiny. The identification showed Elena's photograph, rank, and assignment information, but the unit designation used acronyms and codes that were unfamiliar to most conventional military personnel. "What unit is this?" Hutchins demanded, though his voice had lost much of its earlier aggression. "I don't recognize these designations." Elena retrieved her identification with calm efficiency. "Colonel, some military assignments require operational security considerations that limit public disclosure of unit information." Morrison studied Elena with new understanding, pieces of a complex puzzle beginning to fall into place. The exceptional marksmanship, the custom precision rifle, the professional demeanor under pressure, all suggested capabilities far beyond recreational shooting. "Ma'am," Morrison said respectfully, "Your shooting performance makes a lot more sense now. That level of precision requires ongoing training and active maintenance of skills." Elena nodded acknowledgement. Marksmanship skills deteriorate quickly without regular practice. That's why I need access to facilities that can accommodate long-distance precision shooting. Hutchins continued examining the identification card, his confidence visibly shaken by this unexpected development. The aggressive posture that had characterized his behavior throughout the morning began to deflate as he processed the implications of Elena's revealed status. "This doesn't change anything," Hutchins declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're still using my range without proper coordination through military channels." Torres cleared his throat diplomatically. "Colonel, active duty personnel have standing authorization to use military facilities when their duties require specialized training that civilian ranges can't accommodate." Several Marines had moved closer, their professional curiosity overriding their earlier skepticism about Elena's presence on the range. The revelation that she remained an active military member transformed their perception of both her capabilities and her right to use their facilities. Private Chin whispered to his squad mate, "That explains everything. The equipment, the shooting, the way she handles pressure. She's operational military, not some weekend warrior." Elena secured her identification and picked up her equipment case, her movements suggesting that she considered this matter resolved. "Gentlemen, I believe this clarifies any questions about my authorization to use this facility." Hutchins remained frozen in place, clearly struggling to process how dramatically the situation had shifted beyond his control and expectations. Hutchins stood motionless, the identification card still clutched in his trembling hand as the full implications of Elena's revelation began to register. The specialized markings and unit designations on her military ID represented capabilities that existed in the shadows of conventional military operations, assignments that required the highest levels of clearance and expertise. "Colonel," Elena said quietly, "I believe you have questions about my rifle's modifications. Perhaps now would be an appropriate time to explain their purpose." The gathered Marines formed a respectful semicircle around Elena's position, their earlier skepticism replaced by professional interest in learning from someone whose skills clearly exceeded their own. Even the most experienced marksmen among them recognized that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elena opened her rifle case with practiced efficiency, revealing the precision weapon that had already demonstrated its remarkable capabilities. However, this time she drew attention to specific modifications that had previously gone unnoticed by the casual observers. "The barrel modifications you see here," Elena explained, pointing to barely visible markings near the muzzle, "are designed for extreme long-distance precision shooting. The custom chamber specifications allow for match-grade ammunition that maintains accuracy beyond conventional rifle capabilities." Torres leaned closer, his professional curiosity overcoming his earlier confusion about Elena's background. "Ma'am, what kind of distances are we talking about when you say extreme long distance?" Elena smiled slightly, her expression suggesting capabilities that went far beyond the 800-yard demonstration she had just completed. "The modifications on this rifle allow for effective precision shooting at distances that most people would consider impossible for a single marksman." Morrison studied the weapon with obvious admiration. "Ma'am, those scope mounts and the custom stock work represent serious investment in precision equipment. This isn't recreational gear." Elena nodded agreement. "Every component has been selected and modified for maximum accuracy under the most demanding conditions. My father began these modifications during his service in Vietnam, and I've continued improving the system based on operational requirements." Hutchins finally found his voice, though it carried none of its earlier authority. "What kind of operational requirements necessitate this level of precision equipment?" Elena's expression grew serious as she considered how much operational information she could safely reveal. "Colonel, there are military assignments that require capabilities beyond conventional marksmanship training. Sometimes a single precise shot can accomplish objectives that would otherwise require significant military resources. The Marines exchanged meaningful glances, beginning to understand that Elena's skills represented capabilities at the highest levels of military specialization. The perfect shooting demonstration they had witnessed was merely a basic display of abilities honed for far more demanding applications. Private Rodriguez studied Elena with new respect. "Ma'am, are you saying you're trained for missions that require impossible shots under combat conditions?" Elena carefully avoided specific operational details while acknowledging the accuracy of his assessment. There are situations where conventional military tactics are not feasible, and alternative approaches become necessary. Precision marksmanship can provide solutions that minimize collateral damage and achieve strategic objectives with minimal resources. Torres watched Elena's explanation with growing understanding. The custom rifle, the exceptional shooting skills, and the specialized military identification all pointed to capabilities that existed at the apex of military marksmanship. Hutchins struggled to maintain his composure as he processed the magnitude of his error in judgment. His aggressive treatment of Elena had not only been inappropriate, but had potentially interfered with the training requirements of someone whose military duties operated at classification levels far above his own. "Ma'am," Morrison said respectfully, "I think I speak for all of us when I say we're honored to have witnessed your shooting demonstration. That level of precision is something most of us will never achieve." Elena began securing her equipment, her movements suggesting that she considered the matter resolved. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your professionalism. However, I should mention that my training requirements typically involve more challenging parameters than the demonstration you witnessed today." "What kind of parameters?" Chen asked, his curiosity overcoming military protocol. Elena paused in her equipment preparation, considering whether to provide a demonstration that would fully reveal the extent of her capabilities. The morning sun had climbed higher, creating ideal conditions for precision shooting, and the range offered targets at distances that would truly test her skills. "Colonel Hutchins," Elena said, turning to face the man who had challenged her presence and abilities, "you asked where I acquired this rifle and questioned my qualifications to use your range. Would you like to see what this equipment can actually accomplish when properly employed?" Hutchins nodded numbly, his earlier arrogance completely deflated by the realization that he had been confronting someone whose military capabilities operated at levels he could barely comprehend. Elena surveyed the range with the calculating gaze of a professional evaluating available options for a demonstration that would settle all questions about her capabilities. Her eyes moved past the 800-yard line, where she had completed Hutchins' challenge, focusing instead on targets positioned at the extreme limits of the facility. Torres followed her gaze toward the distant markers. "Ma'am, our longest target is positioned at 1,200 yards. It's primarily used for advanced sniper training and equipment testing." Elena nodded dojehashfully. 1,200 yards would be adequate for a basic demonstration of this rifle's capabilities. The Marines exchanged glances of amazement. 1,200 yards represented a distance that challenged even the most skilled marksmen under ideal conditions, requiring calculations that accounted for numerous environmental variables and ballistic factors. Morrison stepped forward with obvious concern. "Ma'am, that target is barely visible to the naked eye at that distance. Even with high-powered optics, it's an extremely challenging shot." Elena began making adjustments to her rifle's scope, her movements precise and confident. "Sergeant, the modifications on this weapon are specifically designed for engagements at extended distances. 1,200 yards falls well within its effective range." Hutchins watched Elena's preparation with a mixture of fascination and dread, realizing that he was about to witness a demonstration that would completely redefine his understanding of precision marksmanship. His earlier confidence had been shattered by Elena's revelations, and now he faced the possibility of seeing capabilities that exceeded anything in his military experience. Elena consulted her notebook again, making fresh calculations based on the current atmospheric conditions and the increased distance to the target. The wind patterns at 1,200 yards would be significantly more complex than those affecting her earlier shots, requiring compensation for variables that most shooters never encountered. Torres positioned himself behind the spotting scope, adjusting the powerful optic to focus on the distant target. At 1,200 yards, even the large target frame appeared as a small rectangle against the earthen berm, its scoring rings invisible without magnification. The gathered Marines maintained respectful silence as Elena settled into her shooting position. Her movements demonstrated the same methodical precision that had characterized her earlier performance, but now carried additional weight as everyone present understood they were witnessing capabilities at the highest levels of military specialization. Elena's breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that preceded her most demanding shots. Through her rifle scope, the distant target filled only a fraction of her field of view, requiring absolute precision in sight alignment and trigger control to achieve any degree of accuracy. "Range is hot," Torres announced, his voice carrying across the facility. All personnel behind the firing line for extended distance shooting. The Marines stepped back automatically, their training governing their response despite their intense curiosity about the outcome of this extraordinary demonstration. Even the routine range operations on other firing lines seemed to pause as word spread about the impossible shot being attempted. Elena made final adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for the increased bullet drop and wind drift that would affect her projectile over the extended distance. Her calculations factored in atmospheric pressure, temperature variations, and the complex wind patterns that could deflect a bullet by several feet at 1,200 yards. The rifle settled into perfect alignment as Elena found her natural point of aim. Her finger contacted the trigger with the same deliberate pressure that had produced 5 consecutive bullseyes at 800 yards, but now the margin for error had been reduced to practically nothing. The morning sun created thermal currents that added another layer of complexity to the already demanding shot. Elena waited for a brief lull in the wind patterns, her scope crosshairs steady on the distant target as she prepared to demonstrate capabilities that would silence all remaining doubts about her qualifications. Hutchins stood frozen in anticipation, knowing that the next few seconds would either vindicate his initial skepticism or confirm that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment about Elena's true identity and capabilities. Elena's world narrowed to the essential elements of the shot. Her consciousness focused entirely on the relationship between her rifle's crosshairs and the tiny target that represented the difference between success and failure at a distance that challenged the limits of human marksmanship ability. The rifle's report thundered across the range with authority that seemed to shake the very foundations of the facility. Elena absorbed the recoil smoothly, maintaining her sight picture as the bullet began its 1,200-yard journey toward the distant target. The gathered Marines held their collective breath, knowing they were witnessing something that would become legend among the personnel at Camp Pendleton. Torres peered through the spotting scope, scanning the target face with intense concentration. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as he searched for any sign of impact at the extreme distance. Elena remained motionless behind her rifle, her breathing controlled and steady despite having just attempted a shot that challenged the limits of human capability. "Hit," Torres announced, his voice filled with amazement. "Dead center bullseye at 1,200 yards. The Marines erupted in spontaneous applause and expressions of disbelief. Several experienced marksmen shook their heads in wonder, knowing they had witnessed marksmanship that transcended normal human abilities and entered the realm of legend. Morrison approached Elena's position with obvious reverence. "Ma'am, that shot was absolutely incredible. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of military service." Elena began safing her rifle with the same methodical care she had shown throughout the morning. "Thank you, Sergeant. That represents the standard accuracy requirement for my operational duties." Hutchins stumbled forward, his face pale with the realization of how completely he had misjudged the woman he had been harassing. "Colonel," Torres said quietly, approaching his superior with the spotting scope, "you need to see this target." Hutchins peered through the high-powered optic, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The bullet hole was positioned exactly in the center of the 1,200-yard bullseye, But more significantly, it had been placed with such precision that it formed a distinctive pattern with Elena's earlier impacts. Elena noticed Hutchins' expression and smiled slightly. "Colonel, you asked about the Deadeye mark. What you're seeing through that scope is the signature that identifies my work to those who need to know. The pattern of bullet holes formed a specific configuration that served as an unmistakable calling card, a mark that could only be produced by someone with extraordinary skill and access to the most demanding military assignments. It was the signature of a legend, known only to those who operated at the highest levels of special operations." Torres studied the target pattern with growing understanding. "Ma'am, this marking system, it's used for confirmation of mission completion in specialized operations." Elena nodded as she completed her post-shooting routine. Sometimes it's necessary to verify that specific objectives have been accomplished by qualified personnel rather than by chance or accident. The Marines gathered around the spotting scope, each taking turns to view the impossible shooting pattern that Elena had created across 2 different distances. The precision required to place shots in such specific configurations went beyond marksmanship and entered the realm of surgical precision. Hutchins finally found his voice, though it carried none of its earlier authority. "Ma'am, I owe you a profound apology. I had no idea who you were or what your capabilities represented." Elena secured her rifle in its case and gathered her equipment. "Colonel, your skepticism was understandable. My appearance and civilian attire don't suggest my actual qualifications." Morrison stepped forward with obvious respect. "Ma'am, it's been an honor witnessing your demonstration. Is there anything we can do to better accommodate your training requirements in the future?" Elena considered the offer thoughtfully. "Actually, yes. Your 1,200-yard target represents adequate distance for basic maintenance of skills, but my operational requirements sometimes necessitate engagements at significantly greater distances." Torres nodded understanding. "We can coordinate with range control to arrange access during periods when longer distances will be available for specialized training." The morning sun had climbed high overhead, marking the end of what had begun as a simple range session but had transformed into a demonstration that would be discussed among Marines for years to come. Elena's perfect marksmanship had not only proven her qualifications, but had revealed capabilities that existed at the apex of military specialization. If you enjoyed the story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you've had a similar situation happen to you before. Hutchins watched Elena prepare to leave, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by professional respect and personal humiliation. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I hope you'll accept my apology for my inappropriate behavior this morning." Elena paused at the range exit, turning back to face the man who had challenged her presence and abilities. "Colonel, everyone makes assumptions based on limited information. The important thing is learning from those experiences and applying that knowledge in the future." As Elena walked away from the range, her equipment secure and her training objective accomplished, the Marines remained gathered around the spotting scope, still marveling at the impossible shooting pattern that would forever remind them of the day they witnessed the Deadeye mark.